So we're continuing with Chapter 9, the Luminous Awakening chapter, the Avatamsaka. Oh! Is that better? Okay. So, Chapter 9, Avatamsaka, Luminous Awakening chapter. I'm looking at 53, 54, 55, around there. We're right in the middle of 10 verses spoken by Manjushri. And I want to transition from the one we ended on last week, which was he has the ability to exhort others to go towards a Buddha's Bodhi, and then maybe from there on. So we'll do two slowly and loudly again in Chinese, and I'll do it softly, and then we'll do the English. So it's 有能, so 有能全想佛菩提 处如法界一切智善化众生如雨滴此处佛心方便力 And then the next one, 佛所说法界虽如广大智慧无所碍一切诸行悉以真 what is it? 是筛手方便力 What's the difference in the pronunciation of those the first two characters of the last line, the s and s? We're looking at pinyin, which is different than Wei Giles, but I was just wondering. Z, I guess z and s and z. Oh, okay. Z, okay. My Chinese. Any event. Now if we go to translation, I used this verse last week and gave a story from the highway. I'm going to try to bring in more events from the highway and the bowing because this is where we started with this chapter. And it was also during this time that our teacher, Master Hua, would come out, especially in the early part of the pilgrimage when we were near to Los Angeles. So it was not hard for him to be brought out by some of the lay people. And his visits out, he had often used the Avatamsaka chapter because he knew where we were to give us guidance and principles to the specifics of what we were experiencing in the highway. So he was like a bridge at the beginning. He didn't just speak his own insights per se, although he did that. He would often try to direct us back to the text itself, which could shed light on our experiences and then bridge it like that. So there was quite a bit going on in those early days, and last week I told you about the Christmas Eve story of the little girl that came out. I want to make sure you understood what happened there. At the end, she was so excited, because I was using this line of the goodness, right? Go to the Buddha's Bodhi and uses goodness to transform. In that case, the goodness was giving them gas because they were out of gas, and they could make it home for Christmas Eve, and she was very, very excited. I'm not clear what I said last night, but what she did was very interesting. She was so happy, she was jumping up and down. She says, I knew they'd have it, Daddy, I knew they'd come through, meaning we have something to help them, which was the gas. And then, of course, she looked into the window of the car, and I had lit the lamp to begin our evening translation, and she saw the picture of the Guanyin Bodhisattva picture that we took with us, which is the same Buddha image that's at the City of 10,000 Buddhas, but it was before it was gilded, so it was just rough wood camphor. And when she looked in, she said to her daddy, "Who is that?" Now, I thought she was either talking, because Heng Sure was in the car, or the Buddha image, and I'm not sure which one, but I think she was looking at the image, and her daddy said, "I think that's what they call a Buddha." And then she just smiled, and she looked at the image, and she said, "Bless you." And then she left. And I really liked that, the sort of down-to-earth humane. It wasn't she was Buddhist. I don't know if she was any religious background whatsoever. But for her at that moment, that image connected with her getting gas from these two weird guys on the highway and got her home for Christmas Eve. And there was a positive connection there. So I used that story last week to illustrate this passage. And then I was suggesting that I think generally throughout this text, but particularly these verses here, you see the link between two central elements of the Buddha's teaching. One is wisdom, insight into the nature, reality, things as they really are, and compassion, this oneness identity of with all living beings and not just people. And then the wisdom and compassion are intertwined. The compassion actually grows right out of the wisdom, seeing things as they really are, especially that there's no individual self that's at the center of anything. And the compassion also feeds the wisdom, and they go back and forth. And to me, this is, I was saying last week, I think this is what's driving the mechanism of upaya. Upaya is this skillful responding to the various capacities and potentials of the different living beings, but underneath that upaya is wisdom and compassion. So if there's no wisdom behind the upaya, then there's no goal that the upaya is going towards. It could just be making people happy or making them feel good. But upaya really only makes sense in that it is aiming towards this ultimate liberation and towards the Buddha nature in everybody. Therefore, it's not just you could say the ends justify the means, but the means are related to the ends. It has to be leading towards that. It can't be leading to something that isn't towards that full awakening. And then the compassion, guided by that, then cuts. It really goes to the heart, and it isn't wasted, and there shouldn't be, technically speaking, any fatigue associated with it because it's totally natural and responsive. This week something came up that made me think of maybe the opposite of this a bit. Has the ability to exhort others to go towards the Buddha's Bodhi, tends towards and enters all wisdom, which is like the Dharma realm. He uses goodness to transform beings so they enter into truth. This is the power of experience of the mind that dwells in Buddhahood. The expression, if I understand right, is used to describe this compassion is tong ti dabe, and it literally translates as sort of, we translate as single substance, great compassion, but I think the tong ti means something closer to like all together, to unite, to gather into one, wholly, totally, generally interconnected. That's what the tong means, and it's describing the world of beings, and that there is this profound connection. This passage here talks about using goodness to motivate and generate people. But also, because there is this interconnection, it's not like it's something you imagine, or it's not something you generate. It's meant to be, because it's coming from wisdom, it's meant to be a description of the nature of reality, of the interconnectedness of all beings. So when goodness is generated, it works through this web. It connects through this web, it radiates. And that's why sometimes simple things, for example, when they say somebody resolves to become a monk or nun and they leave home, people that witness that event or even hear about it pick up a vibe. They pick up a radiance of something that's been happening that's transformed, and the world is a better place. You hear of some place where a peace treaty has been signed, and this radiates out and makes everybody feel better. A famine is averted, or something like this. That goodness affects people that aren't even there. But the opposite is also true, that you can exhort others to goodness, but the Buddha's goodness here, it's called. But you can also exhort peoples to what I call Mara's madness. And that also is reflective of this web. You can, I'm going to editorialize a little bit because I was moved this week by some of the news where I saw very innocent people being shot because they hit on the wrong doorbell or went up a driveway the wrong way or got the wrong address. And you can, if you spread fear and hatred and leading to people to be armed to the teeth with weapons, and they're so afraid, and then they unleash these bullets when a doorbell rings without even knowing what's there. In each case, these things radiate through the single substance web. And the example I give is sometimes I sit on my front porch just to sort of sit on my front porch and be in the sun, watch the birds. But the kids come by, and some of them have gotten to know me, and this one little girl came by, and I asked her how she was, and she said, "I can't sleep at night, I'm worried." And I said, "What are you worried about?" She's only in 4th or 5th grade, something like that. "I'm worried about being shot." I said, "What do you mean?" "Well, if I go to my friend's house and I get the address wrong and I knock on the door, somebody could shoot me." And I tried to reassure her. And she was listening to me very carefully. She's a very sharp little girl. And then she says, "Yeah, but it's different for you." I said, "What do you mean?" She says, "You're white, I'm brown." Whoa. I had a pause there, and I realized what she was saying was absolutely true. So what I'm saying is we have to be extremely careful about what we do with our fears and anxieties, to not let them radiate and spread out, and certainly not follow them up with acts that create this kind of web of terror. That's why you have texts, for example, in the Avamtasaka Sutra, from the text from which the Bodhisattva precepts come. Some of you may have taken the Bodhisattva precepts. There's 10 major and 48 minor precepts. At least we used to do that when, even as lay people. Some people say they're only for monks and nuns, but we would take them through our tradition as lay people precepts. So you can take the 5 precepts, you can take the 8 precepts. When you're a novice, you can take the 10. You can go up to the major hundreds for the monks and nuns, but there's that intermediate of the 10 major, 48 minor Bodhisattva precepts. And what these precepts were really struck me was about compassion. Other precepts have to do with disciplining yourself and watching yourself and guarding yourself, but these precepts almost always are coming from a heart of compassion. You do this not just because you're trying to avoid bad karma for yourself or something, but you do this because it creates a compassionate release of energy that benefits others. So I just quote from the Brahmanet in relation to these events, and then I'll end my editorializing here. "A disciple of the Buddha must not sell knives, clubs, bows, arrows, or other life-taking devices." That's what the text says. Now, it also means, I think by extension, not use them, but not even if you don't use them, not to sell them, not to spread them around. I think in my way of interpreting this, when you spread fear and divisiveness among peoples, and that they create this idea of you're living under constant threat, it's as if you're selling these weapons. It amounts to the same thing. And then the text goes on to another part. It says, "To take the life of one being in order to revenge the killing of another is contrary to filial reverence, as we are all related through eons of birth and rebirth." And this is from the Brahmanet Sutra. There's other passages in here that I could use later, but I really like these precepts when I took them because it changed my orientation from just self-cultivation in a sort of narrow sense to this idea of really making this an effort not on just behalf of all humanity, but all living beings. So anyhow, I just want to point out that radiation through that web can go either way. Anyhow, we go on. The next line, accords with and enters all the Dharma that the Buddhas speak, vast and great wisdom, unobstructed, already completely understands all places of practice. This is the power of expedience, of the cultivation of self-mastery. So here, accords with and enters means that in a certain place of your practice and cultivation, the teachings and you start to become one and the same. You actually remold or refashion yourself in such a way that you're not just a Dharma vessel, you're like a Dharma bell, and that everything you say and think and do radiates out with these teachings. This is called embodiment. And so I would, sometimes it's Ru. Here I think is a character which literally means enters. And you see it again, there's twice it appears, at least once here I think. And I would translate some more like immerse or ascends to or relocates or merges with. And I think it's closer here to the idea of you literally, it says manifest a body that speaks Dharma, which means you make your whole being into a voice, so to speak. And also I think enter here then means to penetrate as to completely fathom. And it's a very nuanced understanding and application of all the various Dharma doors. So when you accord and enter that vast, great sea of wisdom, not only means that you yourself are one and the same, you know, you're just so newly formed as to be one and the same with the Dharma, but also you are completely going on, completely understand all places of practice. And this has to do with knowing how to teach and when to teach the various methods of meditation, bowing, giving, all the paramitas and all the various forms of self-cultivation, which would include making Buddha images, include art, music, anything that causes people to resolve. I think all places of practice, one meaning of this, at least in the commentary, is that it means all the states of a fully awakened mind. It's not necessarily literally a place, but the place here is a state of mind. And so it's very interesting in these teachings, state of mind shapes what we think of the place we're in. And the place we're in changes with our state of mind. So even though they use the word places here, they're using it in a much deeper mind ground meaning that wherever we are, what we behold is through the mind itself. So it's both the methods of practice, these places of practice, but also the states of mind that accompany them. This is one of the things that's so remarkable to me about the Avatamsaka and these teachings, and generally the actual fluidity, the dynamic fluidity of what we call reality. And as you begin to practice, you viscerally can see and feel changes in the world that you're living in. And what the takeaway almost always is that yes, things change, but the more profound is that I have changed. And because I have changed, the world looks different. If you hold precepts for a number of years, really, truly, and sincerely, and you start to practice disciplining and training the mind through a daily meditation practice, just that much, literally, the world will look different to you, and people will look different to you. And it won't be something you imagine or project. They will actually look different. It's quite an interesting thing to experiment with. In any event, I was thinking here also wisdom without obstruction. It just reminds, I like fun stories every once in a while, so if I share fun stories with you, not necessarily from the highway, but from the tradition, this is also okay, right? Yeah. When I told this little girl, she said, what do you do? I said, well, I teach about Buddha. What's that? So she says, and I was trying to explain, she says, does it have stories? Yes, it has stories. She says, okay. Then it can't be too bad. Okay, so this is a story. It comes out of the tradition, but it's about this wisdom that isn't obstructed. And partly what wisdom does is, at the very human level, it means you really see things as they are. You're not projecting, and you're not rejecting. You're just a mirror and seeing things very clearly. To get to that place, you have to be in a harmless state where you're not messing things up by harming people. And you also have to be in a less desire space, so you're not projecting your fears and expectations out on everything and then reading it through that. The beginning of wisdom is when those drop away, things appear as they really are, rather than something you're afraid of or fond of and so forth. But at a deeper level, apparently with the wisdoms of a fully awakened being, you begin to see what they call penetrate beyond just the here and now, and you can see past lives and so forth. So this is a story about, you probably know this, but it's fun to tell an old man who wanted to leave home. Oh, we got an old man here who's going to leave home. He's not here tonight, so I can tell the story. Yeah, our elder novice monk here is going, how old is he, do you know? Yeah. 73. Oh, he's not old. Sorry. There once was a young man, 73, who wanted to leave home and become a Buddhist monk. And although he was 70 or 80 years old, this is the text, he couldn't get around well and was aware of his impending decline and death. He thought he could easily leave home and be a high master in the Dharma. But when he got to Jetavana, where the Buddha's assembly was, the garden, it's called the Garden of the Benefactors, or the Orphans and the Solitary, he found that Shakyamuni Buddha had gone out to accept offerings, and his disciples, the Arhats, opened their heavenly eyes. This is the expression they use. They opened their heavenly eyes and took a look at this man to evaluate. They didn't fill out forms, do online kind of things here. You just went in, they opened their heavenly eye, they looked at you and see what your past karma was. And the reason they do this is to see if you have the potential to go through the training and make it. Why bring you in if your karma is so heavy that it's just going to be a miserable thing for you and others if you don't have the good roots and so forth? So they looked for his past karma. And they see that he hadn't done a single good deed in the past 80,000 great aeons. They told him, therefore, you're not eligible, couldn't leave home. And when he heard this, it says the old man's heart just sunk. And he turned cold and he ran thinking, if I can't leave home, I might as well just kill myself. And he was about to throw himself off the cliff into some huge body of water, and the Buddha, Shakyamuni Buddha, walks by and says, what are you doing? And he said, I wanted to leave home, but the Buddha wasn't at the garden, and the great bhikshus told me I couldn't because I have no good roots. My life is meaningless. I'm too old to work. No one takes care of me. I might as well be dead. And Shakyamuni Buddha said, yeah. No. Well, sometimes when I do these stories with the kids, I say, so what do you think the Buddha said? And they go, I won't do that tonight, but he says, don't throw yourself into this ocean. I'll accept you. You will, said the man. Who are you? Do you have any authority to accept me? And the Buddha said, I'm the Buddha, and those bhikshus are my disciples. None of them will object. The old man wiped his eyes, blew his nose, and he says, there might be hope for me. So he brought him back, as the story goes, and his head was shaved and became a monk. And, now this is kind of inconceivable, but immediately ascended to the first stage of arhatship. So try it. Go home, shave your head, and see if that happens. And the text says, why? When he heard that he couldn't leave home, he had decided to drown himself, although he didn't really die. He was as good as dead. Very interesting line. He was as good as dead. In other words, he had passed the state of thinking there was anything really to get meaningfully in this world. And so he was actually, in this sense, open. Sometimes the previous passage says with goodness transforming, but sometimes badness can transform too. The badness being the awakening to, I'm not going to last forever and there's nothing worth getting here. And that's a sort of not a good thing, but it's a reverse, and it can cause a kind of awakening. And he says, I'm as good as dead. I've already thrown myself into the sea. And he relinquished all his attachment to sensory material things. He saw right through everything. And that's how he gained independence, liberation, and certified to the arhatship. Now, this is pretty cool for anybody who's old, you know. But now the bhikshus, though, said, this is really strange. This shouldn't be. This man has no good roots. We wouldn't let him leave home, but the Buddha accepted him, and now he's certified to arhatship. So maybe the Buddha is doing some special number here, or doesn't have anything to do with good roots and karma. So why are we cultivating good roots of karma if it's so automatically easy as, you know, the Buddha finding you on the verge of suicide and so forth? He said, people without good roots can't cultivate this way as a left home. This contradicts the very basic teaching that the Buddha's been giving us, so let's go ask the Buddha. By the way, this is where hermeneutics always comes in. Hermeneutics arises from where there seems to be an inconsistency or contradiction in the teaching. How are we to explain this? Because either the Buddha cheated them and he lied, or there's some special thing here, or he really didn't certify, and so forth. So here we have, he told the disciples, you have to cultivate, and you have to have good roots, and this person didn't have it. Or, anybody? You know the story. Didn't seem to have it. They went to the Buddha, they bowed reverently and said, we are really clear-minded. How could that old man without good roots certify to arhatship? And how can the Buddha Dharma be so inconsistent? And the Buddha said, as arhats, you only see the events of the past 80,000 great aeons. More than 80,000 aeons ago, I can see. And that old man was a firewood gatherer, and one day he was attacked by a tiger in the mountain. He climbed a tree, and the tiger leaped and snapped in its jaws, but missed, and the story elaborates a little. So the tiger, however, was smarter than the average tiger. I'll show you, thought the tiger. Tigers think. Well, we know bees now think, and they dream, so don't dismiss this as not scientific, okay? Latest research shows that. I'll chew through the trunk of the old tree, and when it falls, I'll eat you, thought the tiger. If a mouse can gnaw through wood, how much more can a tiger? So the tiger can make powder out of human bones. It chewed halfway through the tree, and the terrified old man was hanging by a thread. Then he remembered in times of danger, you know, so if you recite the Puman Pin, the Universal Door chapter tells you in times of danger, call out Guanyin Bodhisattva. Then he remembered in times of danger, and he called out, Namo Buddha, really loud. Now, the thing about this story, it doesn't tell you whether the tiger got him or not. You know, it just says he called out that name really sincerely. And I think there's a point to that. It says after the incident, the old man forgot to recite. So maybe he was saved, and they thought that worked, and that's the end of it. For 80,000 great eons, he failed to plant any good roots after that. However, the one cry of Namo Buddha was the good seed that has now ripened and allowed him to leave home and certify. So this is a story. I guess I'm telling the story to illustrate the range of wisdom so that you can have somebody who can see clearly now, but they can't see past lives. And often what people are wrestling with is not necessarily what's immediately going on now, but a mixture of that and habituations and things from past lives. So a really skilled teacher, like a very skilled doctor has, you could say like MRI and X-ray machines that can look past the surface of things and really get at the heart of it. Any event. And the moral of the story is not wait till the last minute, okay? I'm telling you a story, somebody says, yeah, I'm just going to wait till the last minute till I'm really up a tree and something's really after me, and then I'm going to plant the seed. So anyhow, that's the story, I tell you. The 7th verse of the 10, he constantly dwells in nirvana, which is like empty space, appearing by transformation according to minds, nowhere does not encompass, relies on the unmarked and yet takes on conditioned marks. This is the power of expedience of the one who's arrived at what is difficult to arrive at. Technically, the key phrase in all of these texts is sort of a little difficult. It says he dwells, but non-dwelling is the state of awakened liberation. Let the mind be unattached, dwelling nowhere, clinging to nothing. So non-dwelling is a little misleading here, because to constantly dwell in nirvana could mislead to think that this is a fixated place of being. But then it says, which is like empty space. So then you'd have to say, well, that takes it away from a specific time, place, destination, identity thing. An empty space contains everything, but it grasps and attaches to nothing. So it's like a dwelling, not dwelling. It's like being in, but not of, or located any place. It is a free and easy. And that's why I quoted you the passage last week from one of the Passcode Sutras, where technically it says, because of the great vows, which we've been listening about, to rescue and transform living beings, they forego a permanent stillness. They forego a kind of nirvana that's defined as permanent stillness, but they re-enter samsara. But I think it's more accurate to say what the Prajna texts say. It doesn't use that language, they postpone and re-enter, because it's a dualistic language. It says they move freely within both, but abide in neither. And I think that captures more of the spirit of what's being defined here. And the text says, out of compassion they do not dwell in nirvana, but out of wisdom they do not dwell in samsara. And so then they give the example I mentioned last week, like a ferry boat captain that moves back and forth between two shores and doesn't rest or pause in between. So that's how I would work with this dwelling in nirvana, because clearly nirvana and samsara in this state of mind is one and the same. And I think that's what is being conveyed here. I think it also comes up later in this passage here. Let me see if there's a part where I spotted it too. The power of expedience of dwelling in that which is inconceivable. That's on the 9th verse. And then the next line would reinforce it too, appearing by transformation. So even though one is, quote, dwelling in nirvana, there's an activity going on. There's a dynamic compassion activity of according to people's natures and inclinations and whatnot. There's an appearance of this teacher, this transformer of beings. And there's nothing that is outside this compass. This relying on the unmarked yet takes on condition marks just means in the midst of appearances yet not attached to appearances. Working with conditions but not controlled by conditions. The verse I like for this, excuse me if I translate a little more English, but it was one that my teacher gave us, especially me on the highway, because I was supposed to be attending to things. The logistics, the cooking, talking to the cops and the people that came, moving the car, and so forth. And basically, this line came unmarked, yet he takes on conditioned marks. And I said, oh, what does that mean? And he says, and this is the translation I give, he says, the eye see forms, but inside no scratches. The ears hear sound, but the mind doesn't tilt. I use scratches and tilt here. It's literally, the eye see forms inside, it's quiet or nothing. The ears hear the sounds, but there's no dust inside and so forth. But I like this image of the eye see things, see forms, but inside no scratches on the mind. It's a completely unscratched lens. There's nothing that's distorted this way. And the ears hear, but the mind does not tilt, doesn't move, isn't thrown off course. And so this was the instruction I got, is to be right there, alert, aware. At the same time, don't let your lens get scratched, and don't tilt towards like or dislike or anything like that. This is the power of expedience. Arrived at what is difficult to arrive at. I really like that phrase. I mean, anybody who's even gone to a retreat, so we're going to have a Sudana retreat this summer coming up, and that's arriving at at what is difficult to arrive at. One, to get there, not just because it's already filled, so you ought to be on a waiting list. That's not what it only means, but it is difficult. You'd be surprised how difficult it is to go to a 7-day retreat, and you'd think, oh, I'm just going to go, I'll do it next summer and whatnot. When you make that step, the way grows an inch, your karma grows a foot. And the obstacles and impediments, both internal and external, that can arise from consciousness, from the seeds of consciousness when you do this, are quite inconceivable. You go, where did that come from? Where did this obstacle come? Where did this doubt and fear come from, you know? And then when you get in there, it's like they say, the first hit of the game, you're okay. But you got to get that first recitation that first day, and then you realize this was just a thing from my karmic, not imagination, but my karmic flow that bubbled up at this point. But this arrived at, what is difficult to arrive at means to actually carry through your cultivation until it succeeds, until it delivers. This is a moment-to-moment thing that can happen, day to day, just getting up and going through your routines. I mean, arriving at what's difficult to arrive at. There you are sitting at 7 in the morning again. That's arriving at what's difficult to arrive at if you don't have discipline. Arriving at what's difficult, keeping your vegetarian diet. I did it one day, I did it 2 days, now I'm going for this party, oh my God, there's all that stuff. It's arriving, and it can be week to week. Ultimately, it means Anyuttara Samyak Sambodhi, you arrive at perfect enlightenment. But that can be broken down to little steps and arrivals and departures all along the way. For me, it's less of a difficulty now than it was at the beginning, I'll say that. For sure. But what I'm also figuring out too is it is difficult, but arriving what is easy in the end is a greater difficulty. So arriving what is easy to arrive at, that's smooth, but in the end it accumulates into a greater difficulty. Dealing with these small difficulties then turns into a greater ease. But this is where persistence and patience has to come in. You first of all, you have to know that you got a solid teaching. Otherwise, you can't have confidence. If you know you have a solid teaching, you know there's a legacy and a depth to this, and there's a history behind it, and great people have cultivated this, so you're okay with that, then it's just a question of patience and hard work. But if you're patient and persist, but you don't have a good teaching, it's basically like the Shrangma says, it's cooking sand hoping to get rice. So you got to have the right stuff to begin with. Anyhow, 8th verse. I'm moving along. See, we're going to get to number 10 tonight, maybe. Recollects, completely understands, and knows. Morning and night, days and months, years and kalpas, as well as worlds characterized by beginnings and end, creation and destruction. This is the power of expedience, of the mastery over time and numbers. So this is Buddhist math and astronomy here going on. Mastery over time and numbers. Buddhist time and numbers are of a different scale, but are not apart from the ordinary scale. So we map out times and days and months and years and seconds and minutes and so forth. But this goes beyond even that. One Chinese way is doing it the 12 periods of the day and night. So they break up a 24-hour into 2-hour segments. And the text will refer to this at the 6th or the 7th or the 8th, this occurred and so forth. My teacher said something that was really funny. Reminds me, there's a yin and yang balance in the cycle of a day, sun and moon. And so it's looked at a different way, not just click, 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 but a rhythm of energies. And so he said, you be asleep by at least 10 o'clock. Don't stay up past 10. And it's okay to wake up a little after 2. But if you don't get 10 to 2, there's something in the essential organs of replenishment and nourishment that doesn't happen, and you'll throw yourself out over time. So it's just like none of my teachers in elementary school, here's the White House guidelines for sleep. And they didn't explain why. But he was saying it doesn't necessarily have to be 8 hours or 7 hours. That depends on a lot of things. But 10 to 2 is an important time to quiet down and replenish. Okay, so my teacher's commentary on this is really interesting, and I'll only share a little bit tonight. It says, as the worlds are characterized by beginnings and end, creation and destruction, And he goes into this commentary, he says, within this cycle of worlds are created, they dwell, they're destroyed, and then they become empty. These are called the four marks: coming into being, abiding for a while, going bad, and then disappearing. And he says, it takes 20 kalpas for a world to be created. It's created little by little. Then after the world is created, it abides for a time. And the time of dwelling is good, times prosper. And he said, our present earth now is in the stage of dwelling. It hasn't yet declined or been destroyed, but that will be a natural cycle of things. And the time of dwelling lasts 20 kalpas, and the world goes bad, and the time of destruction lasts 20 kalpas, and after it's destroyed, there's a period of 20 kalpas in which it is empty. And then the cycle of creation, abiding, decay, and emptiness continually repeats itself. So he's presenting a worldview of something we know, but it's not maybe this precisely. And then he goes on to say the seasons are this way. There's summer, or spring, the coming into, the summer, the abiding, the fall that declines, and then the winter, and then the recreation of spring. And he says people are the same way. This part I like. We go through birth, abiding, change, and death. Birth takes the first 20 years. No matter how intelligent you are, you still have to go through this period of learning from birth to age 20. This was a long time ago. I think 20 may be a little short right now. I'm sorry, I'm working with people, sometimes 30 is still not quite out of the woods. And after that, there's a period of doing things. This is called dwelling, your busy time of your life, say 20 to 40 or so forth. Again, that could go on longer depending on the economy and so forth. But you go through this year doing 20 years, and you make money, perhaps you create a revolution, he says, or you become president. He says, however, it's not easy to become president here in the United States because you have to, before you're 40 and so forth. He's making commentary on the side. He says, next, though, is change. And just when you're about to become successful in your life work, just when you've got a little bit going for you, a change sets in. A change is leading you to your decline and death. You're in the prime of life, but then the changes start, and you get older day by day. And day by day, you become more useless. Not only are you useless, after age 60, the myriad sicknesses attack you. From age 40 to 60 is when sickness starts to come in, and from 60 to 80 is a period where it really takes over. And no matter who you are, you can't get out of this cycle. Now, this is, of course, if it's a natural cycle, but sometimes the death or decay can happen at a very early age. So this is, if all things go according to plan, it turns out to be like this, but if not, the worlds go through this creation, people go through them, the seasons go through them, and so forth. So this is, I'll read the next one. Living beings undergo production and birth and death. Their form or formlessness, their thought or lack of thought. This is describing the different kinds of beings. Remember last week we did born from egg, womb, moisture, transformation, and so forth. And then there's ones that are born form or formless from thought or no thought. These are different kinds of existence that are sometimes of mostly body and sometimes mostly of mind. All names such as these he completely understands. This is a power of expedience dwelling within what is inconceivable. This is an interesting line. He can understand that all has been spoken through past, present, and future times. And he knows the three periods of time are completely equal. This is the power or expedience of incomparable liberation. This last passage, I'll just make a few comments on. There's so much one could say. He understands all that has been spoken. I think this is a pointing to one of the things that we are trying to do with Dharma Realm Buddhist University is if you're going to teach and transform and work with, alongside with, or make the world a better place, then you're going to be working with people from all over the world with all different languages, all different ways of speaking. And this doesn't just mean, French or English or German or Chinese or Swahili or anything. Languages and how people speak are also their imageries, their myths, their art, their music, the unexamined assumptions. This is all part of a language, so to speak. And so throughout the past, present, and future means you're able to fathom this in a continuity over time and understand how things change and transform by these thought ways, by these values, by these beliefs, and by these languages. Otherwise, you live in a silo, and you think your world is the only world. And when you encounter others, this is what leads to that fear and then, anxiety because, oh, they're different, they're not like me. And when you understand these things at a depth, you realize, yes, on the surface there are differences, but underneath, there's a unitariness to it all. And that's what, in traditional times, meant what a liberal arts education was to bestow, the sense of the inclusiveness, yet allowing for the differentiation on the human condition. So I think this is something we take the Avatamsaka as one of the founding sources of our present university program. And I think I probably should stop there. I could say a lot more. I was going to tell you a story from the highway tonight, but well, the monks aren't here. They're not here. Well, I'll just go back to my orange journal here, and I'll just continue. And it may not have anything to do with the text tonight. It may. Who knows? So this is all really from the same Christmas Eve time. It's very interesting. So on that day, two different things happened. And I'm just reading from the journal. It's Christmas Eve. We're on the coast, parked beneath expansive cypress tree. You all know what cypress trees look like? The California emblematic tree that spreads out along the coast. And sometimes they take the shape of the wind over time because they tend to leave. And it was a full moon. And this drunken man comes up. So the little girl has come up, and we help. The drunken man comes up and he says, "Oh, the Krishnas, the weird ones who are bowing. What are you bowing? 3 bows, 1 step? No, 3 steps, 1 bow." I said, "Oh, yeah. Who'd ever think you'd be out here alone, forsaken on Christmas Eve?" Buddha didn't give you anything, did he? "I got something for you," and he gives us a Bible. And he says, "This is the way, the truth, and the light, you suckers." He gives a Bible. So I'm just telling you, this is a story, and then he leaves. And then earlier in that day, and some of you may or may not be surprised, when you drive along the coast of California, you look at the coast and you stop at nice places to get ice cream and whatever, and nuts and avocados. And but 20, 30 yards off the highway, there's a whole other world and worlds. There's all kinds of people and beings who occupy that strata on either side. And when you go, we were going less than a mile a day, walking and whatnot, you start to encounter, and you go, where did these people come from? I mean, it's just amazing. The one guy I remember, this is a short story, one guy I remember, he's coming in, he walks past me, and he says, he's got a big bag of dog food. And he is just motley and ungainly looking, as you can imagine. And he smiles at me, his teeth are all brown and decayed. And I look at him, he says, "Wow, aren't you weird to us?" And I said, "Well." And I said, "What are you doing?" He said, "I live back here. I eat the dog food. It's really cheap and nutritious. See you guys later." And he goes back. He's like, was he a hermit? Was he it's like, who is this? So these guys, this was that day, this group came out, and this is my note here. They have long white robes on, and they're totally barefooted and kind of ascetic, but they're all covered in dirt. So their hair is not washed, and their faces are not washed, and their hands, and there's dirt everywhere, and their feet are all dirty. And then for some reason, their robes are clean. And so they say, "We came out here, brothers, because we're one and the same." I said, "What do you mean we're one and the same?" He says, "We worship the earth, we worship the ground, and we see that that's what you're doing." And I thought, okay. So I don't know how I came up with this. I said, "We're not worshiping the ground, we're grounding our worship." "What do you mean?" The other one says, "Very mystical." And I said, "So," he says, "you're not bowing to the ground and to the earth and to the Divine Mother?" And I said, no, we're actually not bowing to anybody or anything. And he said, we're bowing away. We're not bowing to. Bowing away to what? You're trying to escape? No, I said, we're bowing away our greed and our anger and our foolishness. And they look at each other. They go, you're weird. And they leave. So this is another encounter. So later, when the master came out to visit, I thought these were two examples of what in the tradition are called externalist. An externalist is a word that's used, literally I think in Chinese it's Wai Dao, right? Wai Dao Ren, or Wai Dao. Many people interpret it as meaning religions that are not Buddhist, so the other religions. And I thought, here's an example of externalist. One was giving us the Bible saying this is the way, the truth, and the light, and all you need is to hold this and you'll be in heaven. And the others were saying all you need to do is love and worship the earth. So before I depart, that night I had this really weird dream. And what was the weird dream? I'm dreaming and I'm in a banquet with all these people and there's just wonderful food. And I'm looking at the food and then they all start and they smear the food all over their bodies, but they don't eat it. And then one of them says, the way, the truth, the light. So that was a dream I had that night. So when Master Hua came out, I said, I think I understand what externalists are. And I explained this, and he says, no, you're not really correct. He says, properly speaking, externalists are not other religions or other belief systems. It's a way of mind. He said, anytime you look outside your own mind and your own nature for liberation, for truth and understanding, you're Wai Dao, you're outside the way, you're outside the mind. So it's not a particular group or religion, but it's an orientation. And then he said this, and I wrote this down because I really liked it. He said, it's a pity that we are immersed every second in the Buddha Dharma and yet do not recognize it. We go outside seeking for the Dharma. The definition of external way is any seeking outside one's own mind. If you understand your mind, if you understand your own mind and see your own nature, this is the real Buddha Dharma. Don't seek for it high or low or far. Every thought, every deed is the practice of the Buddha Dharma. This was the instruction that he gave at that time. And I'll finish with this to go further. When we were about at the end of the section of Los Angeles getting to the coast, of course we had maps, and I looked at the map and looked how long it took us to get through to the coast, and then I followed the map all the way to the city of 10,000 Buddhas, and I just went, whoa. There was this, oh my gosh, how long is this going to take, and what will we have to deal with? And I was sort of in a bit of a panic. And a few days later, the master came out to visit. He had an ability to sort of kind of read one's thoughts. And he said, he gave the verse, he says, too fast you'll trip, too slow you'll far behind, not too fast, not too slow, get there right on time. And he says, don't panic. And then he said this, I'm quoting, he says, don't look back and don't look ahead. Just take one step, one bow at a time. But make sure each step and each bow is single-mindedly true and sincere. Then for sure you will reach your destination. When the mind attends to the here and now, the false returns to true. And he said, be true in everything you do. That was the instruction at that time. And it changed my whole orientation when this passage here, I guess it does relate. The 3 periods of time are completely level and equal. If you're doing this, then time and place sort of don't become so significant. It starts to approach one time is all time, one place is every place. On the contrary, if not, then every place just is hitting you all over the place in terms of where you set up. Now, that being said, we have one more thing to do, and hopefully Ken will come on. So I gave a little pitch tonight for Dharma Buddhist University. As you might know, the class tonight is part of DRBU Extension, and there's other classes, so Ken's going to explain the extension program, And then I'm going to make an announcement that those of you who are interested in the accredited degree granting program, which is a 4-year or the 2-year Buddhist Classics program, we have an enrollment that's ongoing, and we'll be starting a new year next fall. And there's going to be an open house coming soon, so then I'm going to go pitch for the open house. Okay, so Ken, you got the floor.
Okay, he's going to do the 4-year bachelor program and 2-year
For this room yard, but for the Dharma realm, you're not. This is a Dharma realm mic. It goes out to the 10 directions.
Okay. 10 directions, here I come. All right, so if you're, so Marty's going to talk about a 4-year program, which is our Bachelor in Liberal Arts at Dharma Realm Buddhist University, and a Master's program. So if you cannot commit to 2 years or 4 years, there's something called DRB extension. This class is one of them. You don't need to commit for that long. And Doug Powers also has a class, which is currently online on Wednesday night. And we're studying the same exact chapter. Do you know, Marty? Chapter 9. He's almost caught up with you, by the way. And we're supposed to study the Earth Store Sutra too, but I don't know we're going to get it this semester. That's right. And then Dharma Master Chur, we just ended her class. We're studying the Shrangama mantra, line by line. So the thing is, we're hitting summer, so a lot of these extension classes will go on hiatus, but we'll have retreats coming up during the summer. So Sudana Center retreat, what Marty just mentioned, is coming up. Even though it's full right now, still sign up, because we do get people canceling. Just like Marty said, it's really hard to arrive to the hard-to-arrive place. Things happen, so there's always opportunity. And then also one more thing before I forget, the City of 10,000 Buddhas will be fully open on May 27th. So all the Guanyin retreats, Amitabha retreats, all that, everyone could go back. And the extension hosts the Guanyin retreats, and we have classes in the afternoon and evening. So unfortunately, we found out about this too late, so we will not have the summer one, but we're hoping to have the fall Guanyin retreat. And in the spring and Amitabha, usually we could only do Amitabha when it doesn't fall on Christmas, because Doug needs to celebrate Christmas. I think that's it. Any questions? Okay, Marty's gonna pitch the 2-4 years now.
All I'm going to do is announce that we're going to have an open house, particularly on the master's program, the 2-year master's program of Buddhist Classics. So that allows everybody to come to the open house online and get an introduction to what's happening. And that's going to be hosted by our Associate Dean, Professor Stacy Chun, who's sitting over there tonight. Now, don't ask her after what it is. Wait and go online and Zoom. And this is taking place. He transfers all merit and virtue. It's April 26th, Wednesday at, it looks like 6 p.m. PDT. What's PDT?
Pacific Daylight Time.
Oh, Pacific Daylight Time. So this is, and it's called Cultivate Your Inherent Wisdom, the MA in Buddhist Classics Virtual Open House. And it looks like here it's Wednesday. It says 6:45 on the top here, 6 to 6:45. And now the question is online, and I'm trying to figure out how they do that. Alok, do you know how they link into that online?
Yeah, there's a Zoom link, so yeah, I'll post it online for them.
You can post the link online. I'm guessing you could also find it on the DRBU website, right? Right. Okay. Don't miss this. It's a really good chance to ask questions directly about the program and see some of the other people there who might be applying, so you could see some of, could potentially be your cohort. But to me, these events where you get an introduction from somebody who's actually there teaching it and some of the students coming, give you a better flavor of what this could be. It's a very unique and cutting edge program in the sense of it's looking at the primary text right through its own methods and lenses, but it's also very ancient because it's looking at these texts with a pedagogy that goes back to the time of the Buddha himself. So it's very modern and ancient at the same time. So this is the open house, a virtual open house. Professor Chun will be hosting. Yes. Okay.
Turns into